One victory, three services, three entirely different interpretations. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're stepping right into the smoky aftermath of the 1991 Gulf War, Desert Storm. We're going to explore how the U.S. military's most overwhelming modern victory, ironically, completely fractured its strategic thinking. We are talking fierce internal battles over tech, massive budgets, and the very future of warfare. Consider this a masterclass straight out of a war college lecture. Let's dive in. The source material uses this brilliant, super vivid metaphor to describe the post-Desert Storm hangover. It's literally like that old parable of the blind men feeling an elephant. The Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, they each viewed the exact same war through completely subjective, totally self-serving lenses. Instead of coming together with a unified understanding of modern combat, the source notes that each branch basically grabbed onto a different part of the elephant and then claimed their specific experience was the ultimate undeniable truth of the entire war. So you really have to ask yourself, how in the world could the most advanced military in human history experience the exact same conflict, but somehow walk away with entirely different roadmaps for the future? As we go through this, keep in mind how institutional survival, protecting your own turf, often dictates the actual lessons we choose to learn. All right, part one, the Army's elephant leg, the digitized force. Following the war, General Sullivan was the one feeling the leg of the elephant. And honestly, he was sweating it. He saw his Cold War-era ground troops losing their primary adversary with the fall of the Soviet Union. And no Soviet Union meant risking their massive slice of the defense budget. So, his solution? It was radical. He spun up the Louisiana Drill Task Force to completely redesign the Army from the foxholes all the way to the factories, creating a high-tech, digitized force. By pushing straight into information warfare, Sullivan executed what the source calls a brilliant bureaucratic maneuver. He proposed an incredibly expensive reform that effectively justified keeping the Army's massive budget alive and well. Moving right along to part two, growing wings, the Air Force ascendant. Now, while the Army felt the leg, the Air Force felt like they had suddenly grown wings. After executing 38 days of overwhelming bombing in the Gulf, they emerged feeling like the undisputed star of the show. Believing that just one victory was enough to take the leading role across the entire military, they aggressively championed a new strategy: global presence, global power. They started testing expeditionary forces, designed to be ready in 48 hours, claimed priority over operational command, and lobbied heavily for independent spaceflight troops. Basically, pitching advanced space-age systems became their absolute trump card in escalating battle for congressional funding. Next up, part three, abandoning Mahan, the Navy's reinvention. Out on the water, the Navy barely even touched the elephant during the Gulf War, and sitting out the defining conflict of the era forced them into a really painful strategic transformation. For over a century, their doctrine, guided by the legendary Alfred Thayer Mahan, demanded these massive, deep ocean, decisive battles for total sea command. But to stay relevant in a post-Soviet world, they had to completely abandon Mahan. They published a new doctrine called From Sea to Land, pivoting almost entirely to coastal combat and expeditionary land support. As the source metaphorically puts it, the long-tailed sharks of the deep ocean totally transformed into crocodiles rolling in the coastal mud, all just to secure their share of the post-war pie. Which leads us right into part four, the tri-service fracture, bureaucratic fences. So instead of unifying under one shared doctrine, the three branches retreated behind their own bureaucratic fences, fiercely competing against one another. Look at it. The Army had General Sullivan pushing the digitized force. The Air Force had General McPeak pushing global presence, global power. And the Navy had Admiral Borda pushing from sea to land. Every single branch pushed a distinct, highly expensive strategy centered entirely around its own institutional survival. The source paints this incredible picture of a military treating its own sister branches, rather than actual foreign adversaries, as their primary competition for defense dollars. Part 5. The technology trap, the disease of extravagance. This intense internal budgetary warfare led directly into what the source provocatively calls an American addiction to the absolute highest cost warfare imaginable. The numbers here are just staggering. During Desert Storm, the military relied on airplanes that cost an average of $25 million each, and they used them to carry out tens of thousands of bombing runs over just a 42-day period. And it definitely didn't stop there. They were firing $1.3 million Tomahawk-guided missiles just to destroy basic rudimentary targets in foxholes. The cost-to-target ratio was astronomically out of balance.
The source perfectly critiques the staggering $61 billion battle banquet with this absolutely unforgettable quote. It was a strategy of attacking birds with golden bullets. Seriously, they were literally flying mountains of gold into combat, dropping millions of dollars onto fundamentally insignificant targets, simply because they had the budget to actually do it. But why? Why burn all that cash? Well, the text argues this obsession with high-cost tech wasn't just about showing off. It was driven by a single, uniquely powerful societal demand. It really begs the question, can war ever become truly risk-free? The answer to that massive spending spree lies in the pursuit of zero casualties. The text points out that avoiding human loss became so incredibly paramount to American society that common soldiers practically became the costliest security on the battlefield. To protect them, the military replaced traditional military wisdom, courage, and tactical skill with a blind, totally unwavering faith in standoff technology. The new strategy became clear: spend absolutely whatever it takes financially, just so we pay nothing in human lives.
All right, let's jump to part 6, the force structure debates. As all this crazy new technology evolved, a massive rift actually formed within the Army over how to physically organize troops on the ground. On one side, you had the divisional faction, and they desperately wanted to hold on to the traditional, massive, and honestly cumbersome division structures. But on the other side, reformists, forming the brigade faction, argued that the realities of the 21st century demanded much smaller, highly mobile combat troops of around 5,000 men. Enter Lieutenant Colonel McGregor, who essentially said, let's just blow up both the traditional division and the brigade systems entirely. He advocated for what he called battle groups. These were envisioned as highly flexible, mission-style forces that heavily leveraged modern command and control networks to hit way harder than forces twice their size. This whole debate really highlights just how deeply entrenched the old ways were, even when facing revolutionary new technology. And finally, part 7, the expeditionary revolution and the illusion of jointness. Ultimately, fast, highly networked expeditionary forces did become the standard across the military. But true jointness, the idea of all branches working seamlessly together, that remained a total illusion. First, the Air Force, Navy, and Army all created their own completely isolated expeditionary forces. Then, when the chairman of the Joint Chiefs actually proposed merging them into an integrated Joint Force 2010, the branches instantly pushed back. The text reports they constantly sabotaged unification because they were terrified of losing their distinct operational identities, and of course, their distinct budgets. Let's quickly trace how their strategic doctrine evolved during this messy time. In 1991, they introduced the Joint Campaigns concept. By 1993, a visionary manual pushed into non-combat operations, attempting to expand into a much broader theory called total dimensional warfare. But then, by 1998, conservative pushback from traditional commanders forced a massive retreat. They tossed those advanced concepts right out the window and reverted back to basic traditional combat operations. The revolution was basically halted in its tracks. And that brings us to the grand tragedy outlined by the source material. Even when the American military actually tried to conceive of total dimensional warfare, their core theory was deeply, fundamentally flawed. Why? Because it remained entirely kinetic. It failed to include non-military combat operations. It completely ignored the economic, political, and psychological domains of warfare. It was a grand theory of total war that completely blinded itself to the non-military realities of modern conflict. Which leaves us with this final, highly provocative thought to chew on today. Unmatched, golden bullet technology might absolutely guarantee you win the battle on the ground. But if your internal bureaucratic battles, your budget chasing, and your massive institutional blind spots keep you from actually understanding why you won, are you truly prepared for the next war? Think about that for a while. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.